My boss kept openly mocking him in front of everyone until he got furious and did this. Hello, Reddit. My name is Fiona, and I'm 29 years old. I work in a fashion designing company as the personal assistant to the CEO, and I've lived with my fiance up until now. I really need some advice, guys, and it's kind of urgent. It's about my fiance, Noah, whom I've been dating for the past 6 years now. He suddenly decided to end our relationship, and publicly, too. It's actually my fault. I mean, totally. All the fault has been mine, and I've tried several times to apologize to him and let him know how sorry I am for the whole thing. But Noah won't even give me a chance. He won't forgive my infidelity. And I really cannot lose Noah. Everything I've worked for and built my whole life would not be perfect or complete if Noah is not in the picture. I really need Noah to forgive me. I desperately want him to. I know I did an awful thing, and I've tried so hard to get him to forgive me, but he won't, which is why I'm here. This really is my last resort. I don't know what to do anymore. At a party organized by my boss, which I invited Noah to as my plus one, he, my boss, made a show of mocking Noah. My boss kept mocking him openly in front of everyone until Noah got furious and did this. He, Noah, broke up with me publicly, right there in front of everyone, after announcing that he knew about my affair with my married boss. After he said his piece, he walked out of the party and presumably out of my life. I won't even begin to tell you about the embarrassment, the finger-pointing, and the whispering that started immediately after Noah said his piece. I wasn't even concerned about it all. All I heard, and what stuck in my head, was that Noah was breaking up with me, and I did not want that to happen at all. I've tried so hard to get Noah to even speak to me again, but he just refuses to. I know I did something really terrible, having an affair with my married boss while also being in a relationship. It wasn't exactly my fault. Well, it is, but I always thought I had a valid reason for doing so. But the reason now all seems very invalid compared to me losing Noah over it. I met my boss, Edward, way back before he was even the CEO of our company. We lived in the same neighborhood growing up, and although we attended the same high school, we were never really friends until university. Edward was the book nerd at that time, and he barely had any friends. I was not exactly the social butterfly either, but I did have more friends than he did. We became friends when we attended the same university. We had mutual friends, so we were always hanging out with the same crowd. Edward and I eventually started dating, and we did so for 3 years. I loved Edward so much, and we literally did everything together. All of our friends knew about us and how crazy we were for each other. When we were in our final year, Edward got a job in another country, but he was asked to finish his education first. It was an amazing offer, and I knew he earned it because of how smart he was. I was very happy for him, but at the same time I felt sad because I didn't know if I could handle a long-distance relationship. Edward reassured me several times, and I wanted to believe what he said, not only because he said it, but because I was too in love with him to let go. We eventually graduated, and within a month, Edward traveled. His then company paid for everything concerning his travel. The first 3 months were sweet torture. We talked all the time on the phone, updated each other on everything we did, and missed each other greatly. But eventually, our conversations reduced to twice or once a day, and it wasn't even on my side. Edward was always busy, and whenever we did talk, he was either too tired to have a long conversation or had only a few minutes to spare, or he couldn't even speak to me at all. This went on for a year until the day I called Edward, and he quickly dismissed me off the phone but didn't end the call. I heard a lady's voice in the background calling out for him. The problem was she wasn't just calling out for him. She called him baby. At first, I tried lying to myself that I heard wrong and that it was probably just a female friend. He was allowed to have female friends. I didn't want to become paranoid. But I started to slowly lose my mind, though I wanted to just give him the benefit of the doubt. It had been another 3 months of literally being in the relationship all by myself when I heard from someone, a mutual friend of ours, that Edward had come home only to get married to his pregnant bride. I was so shocked because I knew for sure it wasn't me since there wasn't a baby in me that I was aware of. I had a mental breakdown. For 2 whole months, I did nothing but stay in bed and cry my eyes out. Eventually, I had to move on, and since I hadn't gotten a job, I settled for part-time jobs. especially because my parents were nagging me about getting one. I saved enough to move out of the town where my parents lived because everything reminded me of Edward. I wanted to forget everything about him. Moving out of town was harder than I thought because everything was much tougher. I couldn't pay my house rent, so eventually I was evicted. Luckily, I met Dora, who allowed me to stay at her place for a while as I worked my part-time jobs. It was then I met Noah, my boyfriend. He had always been a regular customer at the cafe where I worked, and we had a good rapport. He was always teasing me whenever he came to get his regular coffee every morning before work. I liked seeing him because he kind of made my day better. But for almost a week, he didn't show up to get his coffee, and I was very worried because he hardly missed a day. I once jokingly told him his stomach would be a coffee bean farm by now because of the amount of caffeine he took, and he said he usually worked really late and started early, so coffee was the only good part of his day. So I knew there must have been a reason he was avoiding coffee, but there was no way to contact him. When he finally showed up after 2 weeks, I curiously asked why he hadn't been in, and he told me he'd had an accident and had actually been in the hospital for a week, with his company giving him another week of rest too. I was devastated on his behalf and wished him well. Soon enough, Noah asked for my number since we were already friends, and I happily gave it to him, glad I could finally talk to him any time instead of looking forward only to when he came to where I worked. We started texting and I knew I liked him very much, but I felt I'd already been scarred by Edward and didn't want to start anything new. However, Noah was nothing like Edward. He treated me right and with respect. He could easily tell when I was unhappy and did everything in his power to make me happy. Eventually, Noah asked me to be his girlfriend, and I agreed, but not without doubts. At first, I pretended I wasn't jealous when he got calls from his coworkers, especially when they were female. I didn't want him to think I was insecure, so I kept quiet. But soon enough, I couldn't bear the thought of him in any space with another woman besides me. I was paranoid. I started fights whenever he got a call from work because I instantly believed he was cheating on me. Noah tried several times to reassure me, but I couldn't settle it in my head. I knew in my heart that Noah loved me very much and would never cheat on me, but it was as though my body projected a different meaning entirely whenever I saw any female around him. One time, on one occasion, I almost hit his cousin who came to visit him and stayed with the intention of meeting me. By that point, we were 2 years into the relationship, and I had moved in with Noah since I had no place of my own, and Noah suggested it since we were together. When I heard a female laughing in the kitchen, I saw red, dashed for her, and almost hit her. Luckily, Noah saw me coming and was able to remove me before any real damage was done. When I finally knew who she was, I felt so embarrassed and apologized several times for it, but that was the last time his cousin visited the house. Noah was angry with me, but eventually forgave me after I kept pleading. The crazy thing was, he had called me earlier that day when I was at work to tell me his cousin was stopping by and wanted to see me before leaving. But I lost all sense of reasoning when I saw her sitting comfortably in the kitchen, eating my fries, and laughing at something Noah said. Eventually, I got tired of working part-time jobs and wanted a real job, and Noah pulled a favor for me. He asked a friend, and I got a job as a secretary at a printing press. The job was stressful, especially because my boss was a big nag. He complained about everything, and even if everything was okay, he still found something to complain about. I hated working there, but the pay was good, and I didn't want to go back to part-time jobs. I wanted a normal 9-to-5 job like everyone else. So I kept going for a year until the company went bankrupt because my boss treated it like his personal account, so he eventually had no money to pay anyone. He decided to let everyone go. Because I was desperate, I asked him to cut my salary in half so I could keep my job, and he agreed at first. This went on for 2 months. Because almost everyone had left, the workload became too much for the few of us who remained. I had to triple task to get things done, and it took its toll on me, but I didn't back down. Noah advised me several times to quit so I wouldn't have to deal with the unappreciative comments I got nearly every day from my boss. Eventually, my boss got married, but with no money for the wedding, he sold what was left of the company without caring about us, those who still worked there. The new company planned to convert the place into a warehouse, so there was literally no role for me as a secretary or any other position. I had no choice but to leave. I didn't want to stay at home because of my mental health. I am an overthinker, and I knew staying at home would do me no good as I would become very paranoid and start becoming more obsessed with monitoring Noah than I already was. So staying at home before I finally got the job as a personal assistant had been quite torturous, more so for Noah than for me. I felt like he should have more time for me, and whenever he had to work, I felt jealous, especially knowing he had female coworkers. If he called to say he had to work late, I started overthinking and ended up stalking him to see whether he was really working or not. There was one time I actually stalked him on a trip. Noah had to go on a sudden work trip, and I had a fight with him about it because I thought he was lying. Eventually, when Noah left the next day, I packed a bag and followed him. It wasn't until I saw him sitting with two business partners that I felt reassured he was actually there for business, and both business people were male. Noah didn't know I'd stalked him until he was telling me about his trip and trying to describe the weird color of one partner's suit, and I blurted out to correct him on the actual color. He was shocked I knew the color his partner wore, and he realized I'd stalked him. Noah kept insisting I trust him, and I did, but I couldn't help my thoughts. So I asked Noah again to help me get a job. Luckily, he accepted and asked a cousin of his who worked at the fashion designing company where I now work to get me a job. Fortunately, the personal secretary job was open, and I took it. I was so happy to work in a fashion line because I love fashion designing so much. I never learned how to design despite my love for it, so I was thrilled to work in a place where I could see firsthand what they did. When I got the job, my boss, the CEO, was out of the country on a work trip, but I was updated on everything I needed to know by his last personal assistant, who had to quit because she was heavily pregnant, and her husband insisted she stop working. She had shown me how everything worked, and within a week, I was helping sort out everything the boss needed from here. It took another month before the CEO finally came around. It was a huge shock to me when I realized that my boss was actually Edward. Apparently, he had quit working in the company he was with while we were dating, after he got married, and decided to take over his wife's father's company. When Edward saw me, realizing I was the one he had been talking to on the phone for over a month, he was also shocked I was his personal assistant. I thought about quitting the job, but the pay was just too good to make me quit. I decided in my head that if Edward wasn't going to fire me, then I wasn't going to quit. And I decided that I had already moved on, so there was no need to quit, and I didn't tell Noah anything about Edward. He only knew him as my ex who got married, but he didn't know he was my boss. There was no reason not to tell him, but I just felt it wasn't necessary. Edward summoned me into his office the next day, and I thought it was because he wanted to break things off with me. But instead, he praised my work for the short time I'd worked with him, even though it had been mostly over the phone, saying I had been efficient. He also said he didn't want our past interfering with our present and didn't want to fire me because of our history. We both agreed that the past was in the past and that we should move on. We worked closely together for a month before our affair actually began. Of course, as per my job description, I had to follow him around, set up his schedules and all, so we worked closely despite it being uncomfortable for me. I couldn't exactly complain because I wanted the job. One time, Edward asked me to pack a bag for a 3-day work trip, and I obliged. I told Noah about it, and he had no objection since it was work, and probably because he didn't even know Edward was my ex. When we got to the place, I expected to get called up for work after I settled in, but instead I was treated to a nice dinner. Edward even requested that I dress nicely for the night, and I did exactly that, thinking it was for work purposes. When I asked what it all was for, he told me he wanted to apologize for what he did to me. He told me that he had met Nina, and they had been friends but ended up having drunken sex, resulting in her pregnancy. The only thing he felt he could do was marry her. He told me how much he missed me and regretted marrying Nina. I told him I was in a relationship that I didn't want to jeopardize. I hadn't wanted to cheat on Noah, so I turned down his offer to be together, despite both of us being in committed relationships. But Edward didn't stop with just that night. He spent the next 3 days convincing me of how good we could be together. He took me on different dates, and we explored the town together. He even took me shopping and bought me loads of expensive things. I know, I could have rejected going on those dates, and I actually could have gone back home. I wouldn't have gotten fired because he wouldn't have been able to fire me for not staying on a trip that wasn't business related. But I stayed. allowed him to drag me to lunch and dinner at fancy restaurants, and let him buy me clothes and jewelry. And on the last day, I even let him tempt me enough to sleep with him. He asked me to bring some documents to his room, and I did because he said he wanted to check through them before we had to travel back. But instead of checking the documents, he asked me to sit with him and share a bottle of champagne. I obliged, and after a drink, he began telling me how miserable he was with his wife, and that he still regretted losing me. One thing led to another, and before I could understand what was happening, we were already kissing. We had sex. I slept with Edward that night, and when I got back home, I felt really guilty for what I had done. I didn't want Noah finding out. When he asked about the trip, I just grumpily told him it went well. I knew that by seeing my mood, he'd think my boss probably did something upsetting, so I pretended to be sulky about the whole trip. Luckily, he didn't ask me any more questions. Edward continued to demand that I sleep with him, and our affair went on. Most times, we stepped out of the office under the pretense of work and went somewhere else to have sex. He would send me money regularly aside from my salary, and I won't lie. Despite my guilt, I enjoyed spending the money. Noah noticed the change in my wardrobe and kept asking where I got the money, but I kept up the pretense, telling him it was from my salary and that my boss kept giving me raises because I was good at my job. Noah proposed to me on my 29th birthday. He insisted I keep my evening free, so I turned down Edward's plan to take me out that night to celebrate so I could spend it with Noah. Noah had it all planned out, and it was amazing. I was really surprised when he went down on one knee to propose.
I made it.
That evening, I thought we were just going to have dinner to celebrate my birthday. I didn't think anything unusual until we got to the restaurant. It was dark, and it looked like they were closed. I turned to ask Noah questions, but he just led me inside. As soon as I got in, the lights came on and some people shouted, "Happy birthday." It was our families. Noah had invited our families to celebrate with us, and I was so happy. I was even happier when he got on one knee and proposed to me. But when I got to work the next day and Edward saw the ring on my finger, he started to act like a jealous lover and was grumpy the whole day. In fact, he told me to stop wearing the ring because it was affecting my work, but I knew it wasn't, as the ring was nothing fancy. Ever since Edward found out that Noah and I were planning our wedding, he started to act up, demanding more of my time and asking me to come see him at odd hours. I had to keep my phone on silent most nights because he would suddenly ring me up, drunk, asking if I could come over. Sometimes it was just to ask if I was sharing the same bed as Noah. I knew Noah was starting to get suspicious of the midnight calls, and I lied to him that it was just a spam caller. When Edward realized I wasn't going to pick up his calls, he'd text over and over again. He then started mocking Noah for not being enough, saying that if he were, I wouldn't think to cheat on him, Noah, with him, Edward. He would even go as far as doing it again when we were having sex, saying he'd bet Noah wasn't good enough sexually, which was why I came to him. I said nothing about all this, despite how untrue his conclusions were, because I didn't want to argue, and also because I was getting used to the money he sent me. I loved being able to live a lavish lifestyle, and it didn't have to come from my pocket. He literally paid for everything that involved me. Noah wanted us to start planning our wedding, but he wanted to save up for a house first so we wouldn't have to rent anymore, and I had agreed at first. I had the money to give him to buy a house, but I was scared he'd realize I actually got it from my affair, so I said nothing and allowed him to continue saving up for the house. After a month of being engaged, I kept nagging Noah to get the house as soon as possible so we could get married. I wanted us to marry quickly because I thought that once we were married, I'd be able to stop the affair with Edward and finally be with Noah without feeling so guilty. Eventually, Edward had to host an event to launch the new collection of clothes we had produced. We were told we could bring a partner with us, so I invited Noah as my fiancé. Noah initially didn't want to come along because he knew nothing about fashion and would feel out of place, but I insisted. I couldn't claim to have a fiancé and not invite someone to the party, so I guilt-tripped him into going. Now I wish I hadn't even insisted he come with me, because maybe he'd still be engaged to me right now. We went to the party, and everything was going fine until I introduced Noah to Edward. Edward's countenance changed, and he started to insult Noah. He mockingly asked him questions only to contradict everything Noah said. I was frustrated but couldn't say anything to avoid raising suspicion. The party started, and Edward insisted that Noah and I sit at his table. It was obvious Noah was uncomfortable, and he was only tolerating Edward because of me. I texted Edward to stop insulting Noah and even added a threat that I'd never let him touch me again if he didn't stop. Well, the text hadn't gotten to Edward because I had mistakenly sent it to Noah. I hadn't even noticed until after the whole party. Edward kept making silly comments about Noah and mocking him until Noah finally got up angrily, announcing publicly what exactly he thought of my boss. He also further announced that he was breaking things off with me and that I could go continue my affair with my married boss. I was so shocked, and it felt like a dream until Noah left, and I realized what had just happened. I got up, not minding the whispers and shock on everyone's faces, and ran after Noah, but he had already left. When I took a cab to our place, he hadn't been home. It's been 4 whole days, and I haven't seen or heard anything from Noah. I've tried calling and texting, but he won't respond to me. Please, guys, I really need your advice. How do I get Noah to forgive me and continue with our plans to marry? The thought of losing Noah is so scary, I really cannot lose him. So please, guys, help me. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been an awful 2 months, the most dreadful, really. I cannot begin to put into words how I feel. I feel a lot of things, and yet I feel so empty. I lost Noah because of my stupid actions. He won't even have anything to do with me anymore. It really is true, isn't it? You don't know what you have until you lose it. I had Noah. I had the best man with me, but I lost him because of my foolish actions. I stupidly threw away everything I had with Noah. I gambled with it, and I lost. Now that I've had a lot of time to think about what I've done, I realize just how foolishly I behaved. Going back to someone who had hurt me in the first place just for money. Now even Edward is in deep shit. His wife was present at the party and saw everything, so she's filed for divorce. And since everything he has belongs to his wife, I'm guessing he'll be left with nothing. The crazy thing is that doesn't even please me, because I could have said no. I could have avoided all of this in the first place. I should have seen him as the treacherous monster he was after dumping me the first time and still coming back even though he was married. I should have listened to my instinct about him, and I should never have cheated in the first place. I came here thinking I could get some sort of help so I could get Noah back. I realize now what a stupid decision I made. The way you guys just use your words has a way of piercing through my heart, and it lets me know just how much you guys feel about me. Even though we do not know each other physically, your words really traveled far and had their way of hurting me. I know now how stupid I am, thinking I could come in here and get some sort of pity party to help me get back Noah. I feel so afraid, because the future really feels like a long time away, and it's scary because it feels blank. There's no me without Noah. I lost everything when I lost Noah. Loneliness is probably a smaller word compared to how alone I feel right now. Now, the whole reason I had an affair in the first place feels stupid. There wasn't even a valid reason for cheating anyway. It's funny how you think you have everything figured out. Your plans, your dreams, your future, and then, in a minute, everything just unravels and cannot be pieced back together. I'm left to wonder. I wish I had never cheated on Noah. Maybe now we'd be married, living in our own house, and probably trying for kids. I remember that Noah and I discussed once that when we did get married, we wouldn't wait to have kids. Now that plan is gone. In fact, every plan is gone. I'm so miserable. I know that Noah will never forgive me now or ever, and that thought alone is killing enough. I shot myself in the foot, really. How could I have expected that he would truly forgive me after everything that happened? Somehow I thought I could get away with it all. I thought I could end things with Edward without it getting messy, and I could marry Noah without him finding out about my infidelity. How could I ever have thought I could get away with hurting Noah the way I did? Stupid, stupid, stupid me. Crying until my throat feels sore is my everyday normal. Noah was the best man for me, but I kept doing everything to push him away. I nagged, suspected him when indeed I was the suspicious one, and did things that would normally make a man run away. But Noah didn't leave. He kept putting up with me until I finally pushed him to the wall. Just how much he endured with me. I cannot forgive myself for everything I did to Noah. I hate myself so much for everything I did. This guilt will probably be part of my life for the rest of my days on earth. This heavy, painful guilt of having had the best man and yet losing him because I was stupid. I wish I had a manual to navigate this difficult stage of my life. But then again, the manual would probably get to an endpoint. But I know that this pain will probably never stop. And the most painful thing of all is that I deserve the pain. I deserve all of this emptiness inside, and I deserve being cast aside by Noah. I cannot even blame the devil for my mistakes because I made them myself. I had the choice to do otherwise, but I chose to do something as stupid as cheating, and now I have to live with this craziness that is my life now. Update. Hello, Reddit. This is my very last post here. I'm sure y'all are happy I'm finally going to stop posting my sob story. But the reason I kept typing and rambling about the same thing over and over again is because I have no one else to talk to, no one else to share all of this with. You guys, no matter how much your comments hurt, are still the only ones who are actually listening to me right now. Things haven't gotten better, but rather worse, if I could say so. I am still as lonely as one could ever be. I am so alone at the moment, and everything hurts. Really bad, I must say. Have you ever felt so empty, and yet that emptiness still hurts just as badly as having everything? I feel a lot of emotions, and yet I feel nothing. I desperately wish I had done the right things when they did matter. Now it doesn't even matter if I cheated or not because I don't even get the chance to right my wrongs. That feeling of being swept under the rug is just never far. I feel like I really do not exist on this planet anymore. I feel like the living dead. Animals are probably better than me. At least they're fed and checked on to make sure they're fine. Nobody even cares whether or not I am alive. The one person who ever really did, I lost the right to actually call him. Even if I did, I'm sure he wouldn't want to hear anything I have to say. I feel trapped. Trapped under the consequences of my sins and the weight of my sins. How do I move on? How do I even get on? I have absolutely no idea what to do or how to get on. Everything feels too much, but I know I'm the cause of everything. The feeling of drowning just isn't exactly the nicest feeling to have. If a few months already feels like this, I wonder just how a year or 2 years will feel. Though one thing I know for sure is that I will forever live with this pain in my heart. I hurt Noah deeply. I know that, and I will forever be sorry I did. If you ever come across this, Noah, somehow and someplace, I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am. I know that the word sorry could never make up for everything I did to you, and I'm not apologizing because I want you to take me back. No matter how much I want that, I know it's impossible for you to. I know how crazy it must have been for you to find out through a text that I was cheating on you. I'm sorry I ever thought I could get away with everything I did to you. I'm sorry you had to put up with my stupid attitudes throughout our relationship. I just wanted to tell you I know I'll pay for my sins for the rest of my life if that's any consolation. I wish you all the happiness in your life and that you'd find a woman who would treat you like you ought to be treated. It kills me to think that you'd eventually move on or probably may have with another woman. But I know I don't even deserve to think that woman would ever be me. I really am sorry I ever hurt you, Noah. And I sure hope you guys learned something from my life, even though you hate me. Thanks and goodbye.